Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jonathan Cooper. I live in Vancouver, BC. I'm a real estate executive, primarily involved with real estate development and property investment in the kind of hotel, office, parking, and general mixed-use development sides of our business. But tonight, I'm talking about Lakeforest Mall, a 103-acre site in Gaithersburg, Maryland, just off I-270, 23 miles north of Washington, D.C. Talking about the site, the market demographics impacting future development on that site and its suitability for different forms of development. So the first thing I find really noteworthy about Lakeforest Mall as a development opportunity, and I'll refer to it as LFM sometimes throughout this presentation, is what you could call its scale or its scope. At 103 acres, 4 million square feet, it has the potential to become a place in and of itself, placemaking. That's something that is discussed a lot in real estate development circles these days, and this site truly has the possibility of becoming a new place, almost in a sense of creating a new community. But in order to do that, I believe that the only form of development one could pursue, that a developer could pursue on this site or should pursue, is truly mixed use. And to illustrate that, I pulled out this matrix, which was from the Partners for Economic Solutions report that we read on the Montgomery County office market. Now, granted, this is only applying to the state of the office market and sort of recommendations for future office development, but I think it has something instructive for us and for Lakeforest Mall as a site. And what they found in their research, now this is back in 2015, but it still holds today, is that, or 2016, I think, is that, while Montgomery County had a lot of millions of square feet of vacant office space, it was primarily or preponderantly located in standalone office parks, disconnected from services or from other uses, largely disconnected from transit. Whereas, also within Montgomery County, office space that was connected to transit or ideally close to the metro station or a metro station and within a mixed-use environment had a vacancy rate of about 8%, whereas office space in a disconnected, shall we say, standalone office parks had a vacancy rate of 18%, more than double. And so what I think that speaks to is the viability of sort of the interconnected viability of different uses and how they support each other, both for the development itself and for those who live and work there, but also for the sort of magnetism of that development for the surrounding community. So what I'll do in this evening's presentation is at a high level run through the office, the residential rental, and the retail components, talk about the methodology and the conclusions, methodology I used and the conclusions that came out of that analysis. So before we look further at the viability of the different uses that we propose for Lakeforest Mall, just wanted to talk about the primary and secondary target market areas for the development. The primary area defined mainly as the retail target area, but also residential rental, because there are a lot of residents, a lot of amenity-rich apartment buildings, some of which are nearing the end of their usable life, and those people might want to relocate to LFM and still stay in the same neighborhood. Anyway, that's the red delineated space that you see there, and it's primarily shaped by drive times. Using a baseline of a mid-morning weekday commute of, what is 10 to 15 minutes away from the site, and going to capture a lot of households that are north and east of I-270. Also extends a little bit west of I-270 because there's less developed retail offerings there, also higher income. So it's an important target area, and it's easily within 10 to 15 minutes of the site. I think it could even extend further north than I have it here into parts of South Germantown, which are 15 minutes away from the site. But Germantown has very well-established commercial offerings of its own, so we need to be cognizant of that. And doesn't extend as far south, perhaps, because when you go south of Lakeforest Mall, the average annual daily trips, AADTs, traffic counts go to 17,000, 18,000. They start to increase as you go towards DC, much denser traffic, whereas if you go north towards Germantown, they drop off to 9,000 or less. So that area has easier access to LFM. So the secondary market area in black, that's really defined as the target area both for employers that want to stay within the I-270 corridor. Maybe they're a biotech company, so they want to be close to other adjacent sort of types of companies, but they want a more affordable option or something, with more affordable housing for their employees, that sort of thing. So I think the whole swath of I-270 could fall into that category. Also, the target market for the residential rental component, because property values, rents are much lower, as much as 50% lower in Gaithersburg than Bethesda or certainly Washington D.C. So it could offer people a lower cost of living, give them more money in their pocket for consumer goods that they might be interested in. Office market potential. What was the methodology I used here? Well, I looked at the office absorption, the office space absorption over the last 4.75 years, kind of from 2013 up until the end of Q3 2017. You'll see this summarized in the table on your screen, by the way. I tried to analyze the competitive supply coming to the market. There is some, but within 2 miles of Lakeforest Mall, there's virtually none for the next 2 years. A lot of it is about 5 miles away, either closer to North Rockville or Germantown, but there is some competitive supply coming to the market. And most importantly, in a way, we projected, I tried to project what will employment growth be in this, area? How many office using employees, what will the growth in those segments be in Montgomery County and the I-270 corridor, and in the Gaithersburg, kind of North Rockville, Germantown submarket? So some key stats that I extracted from this analysis. Well, one was absorption or lack thereof. I call it disabsorption of space. So in the county over the last 4.5 years, there's been over 550,840 square feet disabsorbed from the market, so come back onto the market with no tenants. The story is actually worse in the submarket area, almost 700,000 square feet disabsorbed over the last 4.75 years. So to complement that somewhat pessimistic data point, office using employment is projected to actually decline within Montgomery County, between now and let's say 2020. So I calculated that based on, so there's going to be a growth or projected growth based on the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and Montgomery County, the Montgomery College has its own demographics and planning office, which aggregates data from BLS and the U.S. Census Bureau and other data points. So while there will be an increase in some professional service jobs, and certainly the county has a lot of pretty aggressive plans to target growth in those sectors, that's going to be more than offset by a decrease in other office using segments, or like, for example, financial services. So on the other hand, what I called the Gaithersburg story that came out of the data is that while you move, let's say, from Clarksburg south towards Washington, D.C., office rental rates generally increase, but in Gaithersburg, that's not the case. They're actually lower than some points further north. That being said, Gaithersburg has consistent income growth and growth in population. Also, the first class A space, the vacancy rate in Gaithersburg is around 9%. And I said here the 10% trigger. That's because, according to our readings, new office development is generally triggered when vacancy is below 10%. Now, as the Partners for Economic Solutions report points out, if we have office space integrated into a mixed-use development, its vacancy is also below 10%, generally speaking, in Montgomery County. So I believe that the target for office development at LFM should be around 100,000 square feet. This is the sort of the use that I'm most apprehensive about because of the rate of disabsorption of space. But I think, again, if it's integrated properly within a comprehensive mixed-use development, it can be successful. Residential development potential. What was the methodology here? So here I just, in a way, first looked at the competitive set, looked at the vacancy rate of surrounding buildings, and even going as far south as Rockville, Germantown, and also in the primary target area. I looked at the rate of household formation and income growth in the market, and I derived a few key stats. Now, one of them, interestingly, or not interestingly, but importantly, is crime rates. Crime rates are much higher And crime rates are much higher in the Gaithersburg area than they are in, let's say, Rockville or Clarksburg. So, some competing municipalities. They're not that high by national standards, but higher than by some markets at which some consumers might be looking as alternatives. A really important data point is that the residential rental vacancy in the primary area and in all the buildings that I looked at was well under 5%, around 3.5%, and it was particularly true of larger 2- and 3-bedroom units, where the 3-bedroom units even commanded a higher rent per square foot than the 2-bedroom units, which is not generally the case. Again, generally rent per square foot goes up for larger units, or excuse me, rent goes up for larger units gross, but per square foot it comes down. This points to a strong demand in the market area for larger units, and most of the units that I looked at as competitors to LFM were in amenity-rich, shall we say, developments with social rooms, with fitness centers, with pools, with outdoor recreation space, those kinds of things. So what were the conclusions? My conclusion here is that household formation and population growth will demand, and also the obsolescence of older homes will demand 3,200 to 4,000 new housing units over the next decade. As I said, this demand will be supplemented by housing that's aging out of the market. This market has a high percentage of renters, 45% versus a 35% average nationally. So there's an established market comfort level with renting versus owning. And the data clearly pointed to a demand for 3-bedroom amenity-rich units. And so I would contemplate as much as 570,000 square feet of a residential rental development, but in 2 phases, starting with 200 units and then with the possibility of scaling up to 300 additional units in a later phase. And again, these units would have to be, or would be, integrated with other uses and supplied with extensive common areas and amenities. So my methodology here, so first was to establish what was the supply of different types of retail within the market area, again looking at the core retail categories of GAFO, NGNS, and F&B. And then once you've established what the supply is, what's the consumer expenditure on those different categories, is the market over or undersupplied? So I looked at those things, and those results, shall we say, are tabulated on the screen there. And when I looked at that, I tried to project out based on population growth and income growth, what would the demand be for retail in 5 years? So a few, again, key data points came out of this. Lakeforest Mall is currently a 1.2 million square foot regional supermall, but if we proceed on the basis it's going to be demolished, then that leaves a big hole in the retail market. When I looked at the consumer spending per square foot, obviously it jumped up when you take Lakeforest Mall out of there, which points to demand, a hole in retail demand that needs to be filled. Also, for the mixed-use development that I'm proposing, that would bring approximately, eventually, 500 families, 475 families, let's say, 95% occupancy to the rental units, and between 600, maybe 550 to 650 office workers. And if you aggregate all of that consumer demand that would be located on site, and if you say that, okay, well, a mixed-use development there could capture 75% of that spending, let's say, on those 3 core retail categories, well, that site-located demand can support in and of itself about 40,000 square feet of retail, which I would say is a nice foundation for a larger retail component of the development. My conclusions were that while based on, how shall I say, unmet demand in the future, the number of square feet that possibly the market area could support, the existence of established competition right near the site, for example, Montgomery Village Crossing and Montgomery Village Center just to the north, Rio Washingtonian, the options in Germantown, that sort of reduced, I think, the potential capture rate, shall we say. Now, another thing I should add is that as part of the forming this analysis, I worked out the capture rate in each category based on the location and strength of competing product. I came out with a conclusion that, of course, this site should include a comprehensive retail development. The biggest opportunity, or sorry, the largest component of which would be 220,000 square feet of NGNS, which is somewhat undersupplied in that area, complemented by 70,000 square feet of F&B and 50,000 square feet of GAFO. But I would avoid for the GAFO a major Lord and Taylor style retailer in favor of something like perhaps one of these smaller footprint Target stores. Still draw a lot of traffic, but not 100,000 square feet. Something maybe like 40,000 square feet, complemented by some other GFO retailers that could appeal to the office workers when they're shopping at lunchtime or to the residents. All told, about 320,000 square feet of retail. And so just to sum everything up, again, I call it the mixed use imperative. The synergies, I think that the Clements reading talked about from our course, Professor Arnold talked about it as well in one of the videos from this course, how the success of the development, the viability of the retail offerings, not just determined, or all the offerings, not just determined by the market factors, the demographics, population, household income, also determined by the components of the development itself, how the synergies feed one another, how office workers shop in the retail, how the residential, the renters, how they eat at the restaurants, and then there's this virtuous cycle of the different uses supporting one another. And as I said, with the consumer demand you're locating on the site through the office and residential components, that can support 40,000 square feet in and of itself, plus the capture of market share from the surrounding community. That's why I believe that Lakeforest Mall should only be pursued as a mixed-use development. And to conclude, I would advise 100,000, give or take, square feet of office integrated within the mixed-use context, 230,000 square feet of residential in a phase 1, with possibly 300,000 more in a phase 2 residential rental, and 320,000 of retail. All told, about 650,000 square feet in the sort of initial phase of development. It could also include not overly large, but well-programmed public spaces for office workers, for residents, for shoppers to recreate, to have outdoor time, agreeable spaces for them to transit as they head from one use to the next. Thank you very much for your time and attention this evening. I've really enjoyed this course and collaborating with all of you. My email address is on the screen, and I would ask you to please stay in touch. Thanks again.